The cold barrel of a gun pressed against the base of my skull was the only thing keeping me upright as the black hood was ripped from my head. I did not see a face first. I saw a pair of hand-sewn leather shoes that cost more than my entire education, resting on a desk of dark, polished oak. The man sitting there did not look like a monster, which made the situation infinitely more terrifying. He looked like a statesman, a pillar of the community, a father. But as he leaned forward, the light caught the jagged scar on his ring finger, and I knew I was looking at the man they called Don. He did not ask me why I had scolded his son in that cafe exactly 1 hour ago. He did not ask if I was afraid. He simply held up a stopwatch and clicked it, the mechanical ticking sounding like a death knell in the silent room. The morning of the 5th of September, 2025, had started with a deceptive sense of tranquility. I remember the exact smell of the air, a mixture of rain-damp pavement and the sweet, yeasty scent of the bakery on the corner of the 4th District. I was sitting in a small corner booth, nursing a porcelain cup of espresso, watching the world wake up through a fogged window. It was my ritual, a moment of peace before the grind of my life as a struggling tutor began. Then, the door chimes jangled violently. Adrian walked in like he owned the sunlight itself. He was barely 17, but he carried an aura of bored destruction that made the other patrons lower their eyes. He was dressed in a silk shirt that rippled like liquid mercury, and his watch reflected the light with a blinding, expensive glare. He sat at the center table and demanded service with a snap of his fingers that sounded like a whip crack. When the waitress, a girl named Maria who was working double shifts to pay for her mother's medicine, accidentally splashed a single drop of steamed milk onto his table, the world seemed to stop. Adrian did not just complain. He erupted with a cold, calculated cruelty. He called her a subhuman, a peasant whose only purpose was to serve his betters without error. He reached out and swept his porcelain cup off the table. It shattered against the floor, and I saw Maria flinch as if she had been struck. Her eyes filled with a terror so pure it made my blood turn to ice. I stood up. My rational mind screamed at me to stay seated, to look at my coffee, to be invisible. But the sight of that girl, trembling and silent under the weight of his verbal assault, was too much. I walked over and placed my hand firmly on Adrian's shoulder. It was like touching a live wire. "Так с людьми не разговаривают," I said in Russian, my native tongue slipping out in my anger before repeating it in English. "This is not how you speak to a human being." Adrian froze. He turned his head slowly, looking at my hand on his shoulder with a look of genuine curiosity, as if a stray dog had just tried to strike up a conversation. He did not scream. He did not fight. He simply smirked, a thin, razor-sharp expression that promised nothing but pain. "You really have no idea who my father is, do you?" he whispered. I did not care then. I told him that his father, whoever he was, had failed to raise a man. Exactly 60 minutes later, as I was walking through the narrow alleyway behind the grocery store, the shadows moved. Two men in charcoal suits, their faces as expressionless as stone, intercepted me. A van door slid open. A hood was pulled over my head, and the world as I knew it ended. Now, in the Don study, the silence was a physical weight. "My son respects no one," the Don said, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid, the ice clinking like falling coins. He explained that his son was a broken tool, sharp but unpredictable. He told me that I had displayed a rare kind of courage, and because of that, I was now his property for the next 30 days. "I have watched you," the Don continued, leaning into the light. "You are a man of principles. You teach history. You teach morality. My son has none. You have exactly 1 month to change that. If, on the 30th of September, he shows a glimmer of true respect, You walk away with enough money to never work again. If you fail, he will not be angry. He will simply remove the problem. And you, my friend, are the problem. The first 5 days at the estate were a descent into a gilded purgatory. The mansion was a fortress of limestone and iron gates, situated on a hill that overlooked the city like a gargoyle. I was given a room that was larger than my entire apartment, filled with heavy velvet curtains and antique furniture that felt like it was watching me. But the doors had no locks on the inside, and there were men with holstered weapons at every exit. Adrian was my shadow, but a hostile one. Our lessons began in the grand library, a room filled with thousands of books that had clearly never been read. On the first day, he sat across from me and spent 4 hours sharpening a small silver letter opener, staring at my throat. Every time I tried to speak about empathy or the social contract, he would simply whistle a low, discordant tune. "You think you can change me?" he asked on the third day, leaning back in his chair. "My father has killed men for less than what you said to me in that cafe. The only reason you're breathing is because he's bored and wants to see if you'll break first." I did not answer with anger. I had realized that Adrian fed on reaction. Instead, I began to ignore his provocations. I brought him journals of men who had survived the gulags, stories of people who had found dignity in the face of absolute horror. I made him sit in silence. When he tried to leave, the guards at the door, on their master's orders, crossed their arms and blocked his path. For the first time in his life, Adrian was told no. By the 5th day, the psychological pressure was mounting. Adrian had moved from overt threats to a quiet, simmering rage. He would wake me up at 2 in the morning by breaking glass in the hallway. He would have the kitchen serve me food that was stone cold or seasoned with far too much salt. He was testing the foundations of my patience, looking for the crack where my morality would crumble into a plea for mercy. But I remembered Maria's face in the cafe. I remembered the Don's stopwatch. I knew that the only way to survive was to become as unyielding as the walls of this prison. The 10th of September arrived with a heavy, oppressive fog that swallowed the city below the estate. I had realized by then that words were useless in the library. Adrian viewed books as paper monuments to dead men, and he had no interest in the dead. To change him, I had to take him to the places where life was stripped to its rawest nerves. I approached the Don and requested permission to take his son beyond the gates, into the parts of the city where the family name was not a shield, but a target. The Don looked at me for a long time, the smoke from his cigar curling around his head like a crown of gray thorns. "You are asking to take the Crown Prince into the mud," he said. "If a single hair on his head is harmed, your 30 days end immediately." But he signaled the guards. We left in an old, unremarkable sedan, far removed from the armored limos Adrian was used to. I drove him to the South Docks, the industrial heart of the city where the air was a thick soup of diesel, salt, and human sweat. I made him stand on the loading piers of the 11th District. This was a place where men worked 18-hour shifts, moving massive shipping containers for a pittance. I took away his phone and his silk jacket, leaving him in a simple white t-shirt. Within 20 minutes, the soot from the chimneys had stained his skin. "Look at them, Adrian," I said, pointing to a group of men hauling rusted chains. "They are not characters in a story. They are the reason you have a roof over your head. If they stop, your world stops." He tried to sneer, tried to find a witty insult, but the sheer scale of the labor around him was deafening. He stood there for 8 hours, forced to watch. When he tried to sit, I reminded him that the men he was watching did not have that luxury. By the 15th of September, we moved from the docks to the tenements. I took him to a communal kitchen in the basement of a crumbling brick building. The air smelled of boiled cabbage and damp wool. I told the woman in charge that Adrian was a volunteer. She did not know his name. She only saw a young man with soft hands and an arrogant tilt to his head. She handed him a ladle and a stack of plastic bowls. For the first hour, he was a statue of pure loathing. He refused to touch the ladle, staring at the line of hungry, broken people as if they were ghosts. But then, an elderly woman reached out and touched his arm. Her skin was like parchment, and her eyes were clouded with cataracts. "Thank you, grandson," she whispered, her voice a fragile rasp. Adrian froze. He looked at her hand, a hand that had clearly worked a lifetime of hard labor, resting on his expensive sleeve. Something in his face shifted. It was not kindness yet, but it was a flicker of recognition. He dipped the ladle into the pot and filled her bowl. He did not say a word, but he did not pull away when her sleeve brushed his. We stayed there until the pot was empty and his back was aching from the strain. The 20th of September marked the beginning of what I thought was the true transformation. We were walking back to the car when a group of local thugs, sensing Adrian's inherent aura of wealth despite his plain clothes, cornered us in an alley. They did not care about dons or empires. They only saw two outsiders. One of them pulled a knife, a jagged thing with a rusted blade. Adrian stepped forward, his old instincts flaring. "Do you know who he started, but I cut him off. I stepped between them, not because I was brave, but because I knew that if he used his name now, the lesson would be lost. I spoke to the men, offering them the little cash I had, speaking to them with a level of respect that caught them off guard. They took the money and left, confused by the lack of fear. "Why did not you let me tell them?" Adrian asked, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and adrenaline. "Because out here, your father's name is just a word," I told him. "Out here, you are just a man. And a man is only as tall as his character." The final week, starting the 23rd of September, felt like a victory lap. Adrian began to speak to the servants at the estate. He asked the head gardener about the flowers. He thanked the cook for the evening meal. He even sought me out in the library to discuss the journals I had given him. He talked about the concept of the social contract, about how a leader is only a leader if his people choose to follow him. I saw the Don watching us from the upper balconies more frequently now. He was a silent, predatory observer of his son's newfound humanity. On the 28th of September, Adrian sat with me on the terrace. The city lights twinkled below us like fallen stars. "I used to think they were just lights," he said softly. "Now I see the people in the apartments, the lives being lived, the struggles I never knew existed. Thank you for showing me the truth." I felt a profound sense of relief. I had done it. I had reached into the dark, hollow chest of a monster son and found a heart. I began to pack my few belongings, thinking of the life I would lead after the 30th. I had survived the month, and more importantly, I had saved a soul. I was a fool. I was the greatest fool who ever lived, because I believed that a man like the Don would pay a tutor to teach his son how to be weak. Part 3. The Architecture of the Abyss. The 30th of September arrived not with a bang, but with a silence so profound it felt like the world had been hollowed out. A thick, gray shroud of mist clung to the limestone walls of the estate, obscuring the city I had grown to see through Adrian's eyes. This was the final day of the 30. I stood in my room, looking at the small suitcase I had packed, my heart performing a nervous, frantic dance against my ribs. I had survived. I had taken a blade of pure spite and tempered it into something resembling a human being. At exactly 10 o'clock in the morning, the heavy mahogany door to my room swung open without a knock. Two guards, their faces as illegible as gravestones, stood in the hallway. "It is time," one of them said. I was led down the grand staircase, the soles of my shoes clicking sharply against the marble. The house felt different, colder, more formal. The servants I had taught Adrian to respect were gone, replaced by men in dark suits who stood like statues in every shadow. When we reached the Don's study, the guards stepped aside. and the heavy oak doors groaned open. The room was flooded with the amber light of a dying fire. The Don was sitting behind his desk, the stopwatch from the first day glinting under the lamp. Beside him stood Adrian. He was dressed in a suit of deep charcoal, his posture perfect, his expression a masterpiece of serene composure. "You look tired," the Don said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to fill the very cracks in the floorboards. "But you look like a man who has won a great victory." He gestured to a chair. "Sit." I remained standing, my eyes fixed on Adrian. I wanted a sign, a nod, some small flicker of the boy who had served soup to the elderly and helped the gardener. Adrian looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a soft, genuine warmth. He stepped forward and placed a hand on my arm, his touch light and reassuring. "You did it, Father," Adrian said, his voice as smooth as velvet. "He showed me everything. I understand now. I understand the value of a single life. I understand how to look into a person's soul and see what they need, what they fear, and what they hope for." I looked at the Don, expecting to see pride. Instead, I saw a terrifying, clinical focus. The Don picked up the stopwatch and clicked it. 30 days, he whispered. Exactly 720 hours. The Don stood up and walked around the desk. He moved with the slow, deliberate grace of an apex predator. "You think you have taught him empathy," he said, looking at me with eyes that were as cold as a mountain lake. "You think you have planted a garden in a desert, but you forgot who I am. I do not pay for gardens. I pay for weapons." He looked at Adrian and nodded. Adrian reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a small, exquisite folding knife I had seen him buy on the 24th of September. At the time, I thought it was a gift for the gardener. "I am so grateful to you," Adrian said, and the terrifying thing was that he sounded sincere. "You taught me how to mimic the heart. You taught me how to make people believe that I am one of them. Before you, I was a blunt instrument. People saw my cruelty and they ran. They hid. They guarded their secrets. But now I can walk into any room, speak with your voice, show your respect, and they will open their doors to me. They will give me their trust, their loyalty, and their lives." The realization hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. The trips to the docks, the soup kitchens, the long nights in the library, they had not been lessons in morality. They had been a masterclass in deception. The Don had not wanted a son with a conscience. He had wanted a son who could wear a conscience like a mask. I had spent 30 days sharpening the most lethal tool in the Don's arsenal, the ability to be loved by the people he intended to destroy. "My son was a tiger who roared," the Don said, standing behind Adrian. "You have taught the tiger how to purr, and a purring tiger can get much closer to its prey." He tapped Adrian on the shoulder. "The final lesson," he whispered. "Every story needs an ending." Adrian stepped closer to me, his face still holding that soft, empathetic expression I had worked so hard to cultivate. He looked like a saint, even as he shifted the knife in his grip. I tried to speak, to scream, to plead, but my throat was a desert. I looked at the boy I thought I had saved, and I saw the truth. The empathy was there, but it was hollow. It was a suit of armor he had learned to put on. He reached out and touched my cheek with his free hand, a gesture of profound, heartbreaking tenderness. "Do not be afraid," he whispered. "I respect you too much to let this be messy." As the blade moved, I realized that the Don had been right from the very beginning. He had not lied once. He told me he would remove the problem. And as the world began to fade into a cold, dark gray, I saw Adrian looking down at me with tears in his eyes. Perfect, beautiful, manufactured tears. And I knew that I had created the most perfect monster the world would ever know. The stopwatch clicked one last time, and then there was only the sound of the fire hissing in the grate.